Yo, what is up guys? It is Bumfris, back with episode 74 of our Reddit series. This one's going to be a bit more entitled parents, and I have a feeling you're going to love this one. Just a quick thank you for all the awesome comments on yesterday's video, I really appreciate it, and if you haven't checked it out already, it was a really funny video, so you definitely should. It's a Reddit video, but funny, so you won't be disappointed. Now sit back, relax, and get annoyed at some entitled parents. So I live in the country near a small town. It only has about 1,000 people and I live there along with most of the kids that go to my school. Unfortunately, that means I live near this entitled kid's family. When they first moved in 5 or so years ago, they were actually pretty cool. Unfortunately, it didn't stay that way. Now, onto the story. So my school releases at 3:30, but all the teachers are required to stay there until at least 4 o'clock in case any students need help on their homework. This includes paras who help with our libraries in our school. It also happens to include any student that is failing a class where they have to stay after school until 4 to work on their grades in that class. The entitled kid in this situation just so happens to be failing a few classes. The entitled kid, by the way, is the worst driver I've ever seen. So one of the paras at my school was driving out of my school parking lot at about 4ish. There is only one main exit that anyone uses, and the entitled kid comes whipping right up behind her in her beat up vehicle that has clearly had a few fender benders. Somehow, she manages to hit the back end of the para's car and leaves a nice little dent along with scratches on their car as well as on her own. Being the entitled little crap that she is, she immediately drives off and pretends that nothing happens. The next day, the para talks to the school administration about having a talk with the entitled kid to sort out the mess she made. When the school brings the entitled kid in, she claims that she wasn't even at the school at the time and that the para must have already had the dent and was just trying to place the blame on the entitled kid so that their family would have to pay for it, as everyone considers her a bad driver, except her parents. The school decides to call the entitled kid's parents, hoping that they'll talk some sense into their daughter, but boy, were they wrong. The entitled dad is technically a tax advisor, but always talks about how he's basically a lawyer and has all the knowledge needed to be one. The entitled mum is just a hype man, I guess woman, to her husband. They are both crazy. When the entitled dad and the entitled mum come in, without even hearing any of the evidence, said that the entitled kid is innocent, as she could never do such a thing with how precious she is. They agree with entitled kid that the para was lying about the damage to her car. The entitled dad says that if the school doesn't punish the para, fire her or something, then he will sue her for false claims and the school for something. He demands that the para admits she was lying about the damage and even pay for repairs for the entitled kid's car for the annoyance that it brought the entitled dad and the entitled mum, as well as upsetting the entitled kid so badly. The para refuses to drop their claims and even decides to countersue the entitled dad and the entitled mum for their claims against her. Little did entitled dad know, but the school had security camera footage literally showing the entitled kid smashing into the para's new car and then speeding off along with the matching dents and scratches. The school and the para never told the entitled dad about the footage, and he actually took her to court and represented himself and his daughter. From what I heard, the second the security footage was presented, he was dumbfounded, and I believe that the para won her countersuit, which fixed all the damages and then some. The school banned the entitled kid from parking in the parking lot for 3 months, as well as banning the entitled dad and the entitled mum from being on school grounds for the same amount of time unless they were specifically called in by the school. Hope that was pretty good. Thanks to those of you who saw it by new. Also, I have plenty more entitled parents / entitled kid stories from this family if you guys want them. They are crazy. But for real though, what kind of supposed lawyer or whatever this dude's job title actually is goes into a court case without any evidence? Like, how dumb can you really be? Just forget about how dumb they are for a second, but like as a family, what kind of value are these people bringing to anyone, like at the school or anywhere else? Like, they're just a waste of everyone's time. If I was principal and someone tried to pull some crap like this, I'd be expelling the person rather than just giving them a 3-month suspension from the car park. I talk about him all the time, but for those of you who haven't heard me babble about him, my little brother was multiply and severely disabled. He wound up passing away at the age of 10, but the 9.75 years between his brain injury and him passing were full of bizarre, crazy, and often entitled run-ins. When he was 1, we moved back to be with my parents' families, which was within an hour drive of a major, very highly respected children's hospital. Prior to this, my mum was making a 6-hour drive just to get him to the correct doctors, so the move was good for everyone. This meant, however, that we were now, unbeknownst to us, using the same children's hospital as a celebrity's child. Both my little brother and the entitled parent's son were diagnosed with cystic fibrosis only a few months apart. For my little brother, the diagnosis was a complete shock. We had no family history of the disease and he was already brain damaged. What the force in this universe thought it was fair to make him deal with both things? For the innocent child, the diagnosis was also a shock, as their family also had no history of the disease. Back then, the average life expectancy for kids with cystic fibrosis was the late teens to the early 20s. It's thankfully now much longer, but things were a lot worse 26 years ago. The entitled parent threw himself into trying to raise money for research, which is a noble enough cause, except he then used those connections to get his kid top priority with everything, whether or not they needed it. Around this time, my baby brother had started wearing leg braces and using a wheelchair when out of the home. He also was non-verbal, so he flapped his arms when he was excited, drooled, and was generally just a goofy kid. It was very obvious something was wrong with him if you even spent a few minutes with him. We got used to the odd looks, so none of us were paying attention when the looks in the CF clinic waiting room were consistently those of panic and not just confusion. The clerks finally told us that the people with newly diagnosed infants and toddlers would come in, see Dewey, then have a panic attack, convinced that their kid would end up like Dewey. The staff spent a lot of time trying to calm these parents and explain that the little boy in question also had brain damage totally unrelated to his cystic fibrosis. After several minutes of conversation between my mum and the clerks, it was decided that instead of sitting in the waiting room with everyone else, we would be left to wait in an exam room in the back. The wait times could exceed 3 hours there, so the clerks were fine with me coming out alone to the waiting room to play with toys, watch TV, or get books to take back. On the fateful day in question, the entitled parent and their kid had arrived, checked in, and been told the wait time would be 1 to 3 hours. About 30 minutes later, my mum, my brother and me walked in, checked in with the clerk, and then were immediately taken into the back. This did not sit well with the entitled parent. He apparently tried harumphing and angry looks for the first few minutes before laying into the desk clerk. I'd gone to grab a book and came back to where mum and my brother were waiting and told her some really big man was yelling a lot. My mum was curious and bored, so she told me to play with my brother and she slipped out of the room. I never heard what happened until years later, but my mum remembers it very well. The entitled parent was screaming, and I mean screaming at the top of his lungs at the desk clerks. How dare they make his precious angel wait while some stupid kid was seen first? Didn't they know who he was? Then he started yelling about how he's donated all this money for a new clinic because his son deserves better than the dirty old clinic that used to be there, which by the way was spotless, it was just out of date. He then goes on about how donating money should mean he never had to wait for anything ever. He'd only done the fundraising and media interviews so that his son could be on the drug trials, whether or not he qualified to get instant help at the hospital, and so that his son could get a double lung transplant without waiting. First off, back then lung transplants for cystic fibrosis were rare, and second off, the feds control those wait lists, so that's not how it works either. He apparently ranted and raved until a clerk was literally dialing security. He finally lowered his volume, but kept telling everyone who worked there how they all sucked and how he'd tell the doctor to fire everyone. He was truly convinced that a donation meant he had the power to decide who worked there. My mum apologised to the clerks at our next visit a few weeks after all of this. They assured her that it wasn't her fault, and the entitled parent was just a giant a-hole and he was always like that. Apparently the hospital had told him before he made his donations that he wouldn't get some of the things he was asking for in return, but he didn't listen to them. My mum asked if he'd calmed down when they finally told him we were in fact still waiting, just out of sight, and the clerk laughed, winked, and said they never told him. He's been so rude to them for so long that all of the staff let him think that somebody else had gotten preferential treatment over him, just to piss him off. Moral of the story, being rich and famous doesn't mean you get everything you want, and don't piss off the front desk clerks at the doctor's office. They control everything. I bet you're probably all wondering who this famous person or celebrity is. Well, I've got the answer, and guess what? I'm not going to tell you. No, but seriously, all jokes aside, if you do want to find out who it is, someone has kind of alluded to it in the comments on the actual post if you want to check it out, but I just don't want to have any negative repercussions of sending people his way. So check it out and you can see. Honestly, in a way though, you do kind of have to feel for them, and it doesn't matter who they are. I'm not saying this because they're famous, but you got to look at it, right, and say they're going through a horrible experience and they are probably just not reacting very well to that. I think the only thing that they're really guilty of is not realizing that there are other people going through the same things and being a little bit selfish. Stick around to the end of this story because there was a nice little update at the end that was just posted today. No real damage done, but it was still annoying. A cousin of mine recently got into Studio Ghibli films and he wanted to borrow Spirited Away, and I was okay with that. His folks go to church in my area, so they agreed to swing by and grab the disc after service. They come in and I go get the disc. My cousin starts asking about some of the other films and anime mixed into my DVD collection. Then he points to Soul Eater. It's a great show, but he just turned 13 and it wasn't exactly age appropriate. Plus, I didn't think his parents, mainly his mother, would approve. They're very religious and the show revolves around soul harvesting, the Grim Reaper, witches, and some fan service. I'm not sure why Ghibli was okay with them because of the spirits, witches, and demons, but I was pretty sure a show called Soul Eater would tip the Jenga tower. So when he asked if he could borrow it, I said no. And that no seemed to catch my aunt's attention as she was by my cousin's side in a flash. She asks why he can't borrow it, and I told her that it may not be age appropriate. She then says something along the lines of, "It's a cartoon. It's meant for children. You're a grown woman and you shouldn't have this anyway." I was a little irritated, but stood firm. Instead, I let the kid borrow my neighbor Totoro as well as Spirited Away, and they went home. I thought everything was good until about an hour ago. I received a call from my screaming aunt, and she accused me of trying to corrupt her son with vulgarity and Satanism. I was lost at first, and then she mentioned a demon and a naked Catwoman being in the first episode. I checked my shelf, and Soul Eater was missing. I'm not sure when she did it, but she'd stolen the box set. They're returning the movies next Sunday, and Soul Eater had better be with them. I'm hoping she doesn't confiscate it like she does with my other ungodly stuff. That set was around $50 after shipping and handling. It was like the first anime box set I ever brought, and I will go to war for it. And this is the update. From what my uncle told me, she had intended on returning it with the other DVDs that my cousin had borrowed. But after watching the first episode of Soul Eater, she planned on throwing it out. Thankfully, this is where my uncle stepped in. For years, the man has been rescuing wicked items from his wife and returning them to his nieces and nephews. Earlier tonight, he stopped by and returned my pilfered box set along with my other DVDs. He apologized for my aunt and promised that it wouldn't happen again. I told him that I didn't feel comfortable lending them movies, but I also told him about Crunchyroll accounts, and he said that he'd tell my cousin. So now, the kid can enjoy anime and his mother won't step foot into my apartment. I know the conclusion wasn't very exciting, but I got my disc back and that's all I wanted. I'm currently binging episodes of Soul Eater and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. When I originally typed it out, I was angry and just trying to vent. I had no idea this was going to blow up. Thank you all for taking the time to read this post and this update. I'm so sick of these dads bailing out their wives who are entitled parents just because they don't want to cause any more trouble. Like, at the end of the day, I know it's great they got their DVDs back, but the entitled parent doesn't suffer any consequences. I think that it's time that we, the people, finally fight back against the entitled parents. We're the only ones that can stop them, and we need to come up with a plan. So about 2 weeks ago, I told you guys 2 stories about the entitled kid who made a mess in our living room, and the entitled mum who complained that salmon tastes like fish without taking a single bite. In my second story, I told you guys about how I ran into her at a grocery store, and after yelling at me for humiliating her, she tried to be all polite and invite herself and the entitled kid to steak night. My first story has since been removed, tried to re-upload but got removed again, but you can still read the second story here. I'll also put this in the comment section if you guys want to see. Now, after all this time, the entitled mum did call my parents asking them to talk to her over a tea or a coffee. They were reluctant at first, but she sounded so sincere, so they decided to meet her. After meeting the entitled mum, what my parents told me was completely unexpected. The entitled mum was actually sorry. Yup, you read that right. The entitled mum actually said she was sorry to both of them for being rude and entitled on every Sunday at church leading up to that dinner party. She said that after I verbally shut her down and she admitted I was right, she couldn't control her anger and threw the dish at me, which by the way I dodged, but it was plastered all over the wall. And after meeting me at the grocery store, the entitled mum told my parents what I told her really stuck with her. The entitled mum was somehow able to afford a therapist, a financial life coach, and has been trying to find a job ever since. Turns out, she actually has a Bachelor of Science in Medicine, but she never found a job with it because she was corrupted by her ex-husband's money. The entitled mum got her crap together, and after multiple interviews, she was hired at a local pharmacy and will be starting this week. She told my parents that she can't rely on money from her family forever and the welfare. The entitled mum also told my parents that she'd let herself go astray from God, and although she won't be returning to our church, she'll be attending elsewhere. Her life coach gave her advice on how to properly raise a child, and the entitled kid was surprisingly okay with the changes. And now, she's actually been trying to raise him right. Lastly, the entitled mum did admit that salmon was a fish, and after recreating the dish from that day, she has really enjoyed it. My parents wished her the best, and the 3 of them prayed together for her success. I really couldn't believe what my parents told me after seeing how sure she was 2 weeks ago. But I am glad that the entitled mum is trying to act like a human being. I know this probably gives you guys the typical justice boner, but I feel like this is a nice ending to an entitled mum's story. Did I not tell you we're going to finish off these episodes with a wholesome story? I now also officially have to take back every single comment that I've ever made about entitled parents not being able to change, because this is evidence that it's possible. Anyone that knows me and knows this channel well enough knows that I'm absolutely kidding. I hate entitled parents more than anyone, and nothing's ever going to change that, even a story like this. So you know what, lady? Good luck. Alright everyone, that is that for today's episode of Entitled Parents. I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm just going to take a second to plug a couple of my social medias, including our Discord server. I do have a Twitter and an Instagram if you want to follow me on both of those. They are both at Bumfris, and feel free to send me a message and I'll do my best to respond. I also just want to take a second to say thank you so much for all the love lately, all of the comments, the likes, the subscribers, just the fact that you guys tune in and watch my videos every day. It really does make my day. Every single one of you is the backbone of this channel, and I really cannot express how much I appreciate that. Without you guys, this channel would be nothing, and I love making these videos for you guys, and I love the fact that you enjoy them. So on that note, I will wrap things up for today's episode of Entitled Parents. I just want to take a second again to say thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and I'll see you all in the next episode of Entitled Parents. Bye.